today I'd like to share with you a game that I played 9 years ago in the Istanbul Open Tournament in 2007, and my opponent was the Georgian, very experienced Georgian Grandmaster Konstantin Chinava. Now, I was playing with white in this game, and I gotta tell you, at that tournament, I was actually playing two tournaments in parallel. Like I had a tournament in the morning, and I had a tournament game in the evening. And it was like all 9 rounds, so that was actually pretty intense. The good thing is I played this game in the beginning of the tournament before I get tired or anything, and I was able to really exploit my opponent's emotions through the game. It was interesting how it all happened. So, I want to share with you guys a few ideas that you can remember, mostly talking about how to impose time pressure on your opponent, intentionally to prolong the game in a rather unclear position, driving the opponent into an unknown and uncontrolled territory, especially a stronger opponent, positions that he doesn't get to control, and how to use his actual change of emotions, like being frustrated to being too overconfident to the advantage. All these things, I was able to really take advantage, and I'm going to show you how you can do this in your next game. So let's get started. I was playing white, and basically I started this game with e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, c takes d, knight takes d. He did knight f6, and I played f3. Now that was a system that a lot of players are like, I don't know, do you really want to play that? But against a strong opponent going into big theoretical lines, that's likely a bad idea. He wouldn't actually think. You just make it very easy for him to make his game. So I didn't want to allow that to happen. I just wanted to make sure that my opponent gets to think. Okay? And I thought that the best way to do this will be through just that one little plan. f3 with an idea to play with the move of, in fact, a pawn to the c4 and similar ideas. So it was interesting. After that move of f3, black did knight c6, c4, queen b6, knight c2, g6, knight c3. Now, also, something important when you're playing a game is to make sure you get the right pawn structure. My idea with playing f3, and the reason why we actually delay the development of the knight on c3, is because we'd like to advance this pawn on c4, and thereby those two pawns are actually controlling the key d5 and b5 squares, which black is intending to reach in order to get a good counterplay. Now, without having the reach on any of these two squares, it will make it a little more difficult for black to get his own game, his own counterplay going. And I have to admit, it's not that easy. So this is very important. When the move of f3 happened, in some way, I think black should have just played out with something like b5 or whatever. But he didn't do it. So I think that he just didn't realize the danger of me playing c4. Now, it's not considered to be very dangerous. But still. Knight c6, c4. And actually what happened in this position is after queen b6, I moved my knight back to c2. I didn't want to exchange. Remember, when you have pressure, this is not a tangible advantage. So you have to understand that it's very important for you to just keep the pieces there. You'd like to make sure that you keep them a little, as much as you can, as long as you could, without really just breaking the pressure and everything through exchanges. So my idea is, like, let's get to keep more pieces on the board. Let's keep it up, and then I'll do more. So after that type of move happened, then what black did was g6. He wanted to get the so-called dragon setup. He did it in a way. He actually playing along with the move of, let's say, pawn to g6. And then after pawn to the g6, bishop g7, I played queen v3. Yeah, that move is necessary. Otherwise, I can't push the pawn on b3 since my knight is going to hang. So at the moment, my opponent was really confident. Now, remember that being confident is good. Being overconfident is not that good. Surely his position was not that bad, so that he gets to feel any pressure or any challenges. But it was getting to a point where certain things would have actually worked out in a favorable way to me. So I can't quite say that this was a good game for him. Okay? It's important to mention that. So after that, surely I felt good. Everything is going in the right way. Maybe even the bishop is going in the right way, being on the e3 in the next move. It's just a cool position. So you did knight d7. I played knight d5. Here, and short castles. Making a little bit of a restriction, especially at a point like this, is just a good idea. It's something great. I knew that by keeping my opponent back, I'm going to hold him in a bit of a worse situation. Is this going to help me to win the game? No. But it's going to give me a good long-term or even short-term advantage and pressure over his position. So it was a good start. He played knight c5. I moved my queen. And then he did f5. Now here, let's talk a little bit about overconfidence. Being overconfident means that you don't have the position or the means to do something special, and yet you feel like you do, and you try it. That often exposes you. Now let's talk about it in two aspects. First, how to avoid it, and second, how to recognize and exploit it. How to recognize and exploit it? Well, being overconfident often happens when people have less development or preparation or certain weaknesses, and yet they open up or they jump in with some tactics. The best way to exploit it is either to find a very forcing sequence that helps you to get something immediately favorable, or just reinforce your position like I did, letting your opponent to go a little further down the line and expose himself even more. If you want to avoid it, I do just recommend you to think every move before you engage with something committal like an exchange or tactical sequence. Ask yourself, how much of preparation do I have so that eventually this will back me up within my tactics? Well, black didn't. Yet I had no tactical sequence, so just played rook b1, which was going to help me prepare b4 or either b3 to complete my development. a5, a3. Of course, b4 looks a lot more delicious. And then black did f4. Naturally, that pawn is untouchable, because if I take it, black would do bishop h6. But little by little, we get to see how black's position becomes, well, overextended. It's a little stretched out. He's moving on the king side, on the queen side. The center is unstable, and more than half of his pieces are in the back rank. You see, I think you got to feel that. You got to sense that. You need structure. You need good backup in the opening. Even though I didn't have the perfect development, I felt like in terms of pawn structure, good control towards the middle, I had these bases that were going to give me a good game in the longer term. So I knew black was going in the wrong direction with this f4. Anyway, he tried to block me by pushing my queen and going knight b3. I just knew that these pieces are not going to do that much. King h1 to make prophylaxis. And then knight a1. It looks like I am really the one who has to worry, but if you think about it more carefully, you realize that I don't. The moment black moves a knight or exchanges, I'm actually going to go with b4 shortly, and that knight on d5 continues to stay pretty menacing. It doesn't mean that I'll win, but it means that black isn't better. Black isn't going to be able to do anything in the shorter run. He traded for the bishop so he can get the bishop pair, and he started a quick attack. And now let's talk again about overconfidence. How do you know that an attack is going to work or not? An attack works if there is a strong or consistent follow-up as continuation. My opponent's attack wasn't going to work because there was no real follow-up, and more importantly, there were no threats. He didn't realize that. He thought about the current bishops and how good they look, but it's not about how they look, it's about what they can do. So I knew my opponent's attack is not going to work. And I knew the more he keeps pushing, the worse and more weakened his position is going to get. So he played king h8, and now I did c5, intending to open the center and make something pretty strong out there. So now we get to another interesting point. You see, I think that my opponent did not realize what's going to happen after c5, and now it became a bit complicated. He started spending more and more time and getting into a bit of an unknown territory. Keep in mind that the more you make your opponent lose control over the events, the larger the possibility is for him to make a mistake. With the move of c5, I'm starting active counterplay, and while my intentions have a pretty specific goal and possibilities like c6 to the d, knight b6, and so on, I wouldn't say that his own ideas are that clear. Okay, and that makes a lot of sense. This is very important. My intention was clear. My possibilities were. His were not. So the moment I played c5, things started getting different. b4 and b5 makes even more sense in this type of position. And actually, this is not a really easy and big position. He played a4, and I just played knight c2. There was no danger for me on the king side, so I realized, you know what, I'm going to just take that time and regroup my knight because I may need it. Intuitively, I knew that when the action starts, it is going to be a great idea for me to get a few more pieces in the proper side of the board, so that actually feels as a very good move, as a very good sequence. Let's do it. Let's get the pieces going, and let's keep black down. That sounds great. So after knight c2, you played rook a5, c6d, and knight b4. Making sure everything is solid is definitely the first part, but you can't expect that this will help you to get the victory. Make sure you constantly add these little improvements. Even if there are no immediate threats or chances to fight for the initiative, just make this happen step by step. And then what happened is after the move of knight b4, h5, I played rook c1. There was no real threat of my opponent on that king side area, so I didn't really expect that he's going to find anything bad. And yeah, let's use his frustration to make him even more spend even more time. He went back, and then I did knight b6. You see, white's position is it has this very gradual and really natural flow to it. Black is kind of forcing the events, and you see that his own pieces are all over the place. That is what I call the overview. When you're thinking about whether you're right or wrong, make an overview like that. Think about this. How much preparation do I have? What sort of threats do I have? Are my pieces well coordinated and advanced? Do I have the center? All these little questions that don't even require so much calculation are going to show you whether you're in the right direction with your analysis. So my opponent said, okay, whatever, you know what, I'm going to just do bishop takes to b2. So at this point, he was already starting to get quite low on time. And you see, that's something interesting. When you get an advantage, one of the things that I'm going to tell you is try to hold your opponent as long as you can in the bad position. Because the longer you keep him there, the more mistakes or bad type of moves he's likely going to make. The more he's going to risk the position because he knows that the longer he stays in this situation, more his time is going to run out and more mistakes he'll likely make. So he'll try to complicate, thereby exposing himself and putting more weaknesses you can exploit. I know that this exchange on a3 just doesn't work because with my knight and the rook, I'm going to attack the d7. And now there was even this rook takes to b4. Now you may be wondering, Valerie, why? Why don't you just take? If I was going to take, my opponent would have just played queen f6 and nothing would have happened. With the capture out there, you realize that in case knight takes to b4 comes, there's queen d4, and I was going to take the knight on b4. Don't forget that candidate moves are always important, so the one that feels most apparent as a move is not always the best. So I took queen e7, rook to d4. And that was the moment where my opponent was already in time trouble. He did not expect this move. He's expecting that I probably will lose one of the rooks, or maybe go back with my knight. But then after rook d4, you understand that black cannot take there due to the check and the fact that d7 is hanging. So now it got very difficult because the position continues to be very unclear. He's already in time trouble, and he has to just stay safe. Now remember this, do not force it. He wants you to force the situation. Keep him longer in the bad position. Now don't keep it too simple. Keep making threats, keep creating problems, but just don't risk it. Right now, after he pushed the pawn in a straightforward manner, I created the threat against his rook, and then I made queen to the d2, which was a very good candidate to line up the pieces. Little square for my king, which was given by my opponent's passive king g8, felt really good. Let's consolidate And let's make another problem again. He can't take the rook due to the discovered attack on f6. He had to move, he had to exchange it. It was too much of a dangerous knight. Takes. Now, that actually, I think, is very important. I mean, I don't believe that it really happened like this, because, I mean, that should be the wrong record. Something went differently. I'm sure that I didn't leave my rook to hang like that. Yeah, it's just this is the move from the database. I think something went different. Perhaps there was an exchange. But anyway, the game continued more or less like that. The rook was not on the d6. I think it probably got exchanged or something. Otherwise, I would have taken a queen, that's for sure. In any case, though, I mean, the important stage of the game was to the point where ultimately I just kept that pressure and let him to suffer being in that difficult, tough position with no threats and nothing so special to do. And even though I don't have the record of this game, and like the finish is not that clear, though it was a pretty beautiful finish, it's still very interesting and beautiful to see how all these little concepts, like imposing time pressure, holding him in a more challenging position, making sure you get him in an uncharted territory, and using his overconfidence can help you to get an advantage. That is an important psychological lesson I was able to learn some years ago. And that was in 2005 when I played in the National Team Championship for Juniors versus a very strong player who's just almost won the World Chess Championship for under 14. He became a runner-up and essentially one of the best players in my age group. Some of you will say, but this is a kid's game, the kid's psychology is very different. Yet you have to know that we were both over 2200 in rating. So we had a master level, and essentially that makes us more than qualified to play a good game. Yes, he was a teenager, but essentially that doesn't reflect over the different ways in how I was able to use important key moments in the game to a psychological advantage. The important thing is that for the preparation of this game, I had nothing else but my dad, who's been my coach, and essentially an old book on the Sicilian Scheveningen, an old Russian book. That was obviously not that sufficient, yet it was a team championship, so I was hoping that my opponent will not be ready if I prepare some old line. Yeah, old doesn't mean necessarily too bad, but it's important to know that the first negative emotion to cause confusion and problems over your opponent is when you manage to get him in an uncharted territory. It's not that he will not know what to do, he'll figure it out. But obviously he's going to feel very uncomfortable when you make your opponent to think from the very beginning. In likelihood, because there are so many variables, an opening surprise makes people do a lot bigger long-term mistakes simply because they don't know exactly how to manage their development and create a better skeleton. So we're going to talk about that. I started the game with e4. My opponent played c5, knight f3, e6, d4. Exchange takes, knight f6, knight c3, and d6. I don't need to comment the opening because this is probably one of the most common opening systems. It's called the Scheveningen variation. And essentially the idea of this opening is that white is getting a very good, easy development and support over the center. As black played d6, which I actually expected, I went and prepared the so-called Keres attack against the Scheveningen. It's not an opening that is known as being super popular or easy to play, but one of the things that this does is that it basically guarantees white a sharp position in which he is going to be attacking, and the risk is not too great. So that was something I really liked. I mean, obviously, the point of g4 is to guarantee g5 as a candidate, and everything would have seemed like an excellent way to go. So I liked the position, and I certainly wanted to give it a try. I expected that he's going to play a6 because this is what my opponent has been playing in previous games I've seen. So the idea, of course, is that black plays along with a6 in order to prepare for a potential b5, so it makes sense. However, after a6, white plays g5, knight d7, and bishop e3. Remember that when you want to surprise your opponent, there is one very important thing you need to understand, and this is the risk factor. Some lines are not going to be that risky, and you will just surprise your opponent in terms of the opening order. However, some other variations could actually pose quite a bit of a risk to your position. So for this reason, I recommend that you're being careful. Just think about it. How much will the risk be, and is it worth it? So essentially, in that position, in that one position here, after my move of bishop to the e3, position feels pretty good, the control is decent, and of course everything feels more or less proper. So after that, a candidate, essentially what black played was pawn up to the b5, and most naturally, of course, black is ready to develop and get a little bit more control on the queen side. After that move, and as it actually happened, then of course there was the move of pawn to f4. Now, why is this move important in any way? Well, the reason why that move is so valuable is because something you will realize is that white is getting a huge amount of space and control around that area, and then we can see that this makes a lot of sense. First off, we can understand that white is able to quite easily get ready, and then we can have the possible shot to play along with pawn up to f5. There could be the way to advance not only with the move of f5, but we also have the shot of playing directly versus e6, and little by little it makes a lot of sense to guarantee much more of a challenge and threats onto the king side. So actually, after continuing with the move of like say pawn up to the f4, things are quite good. Let's take a look and see what comes next in the position. Okay, after that candidate, of course, black played with bishop to the b7, and it is clearly the one idea that's clear out there is to focus upon the move of bishop pawn up to b4. Black would definitely love to eventually advance and to shoot out with the b4. So that's the point. So what's going on now? Well, actually, after black played with the move of bishop b7, I did f5. Now, this was all home preparation. I knew it was a home preparation, and I relied on basically bringing up the challenge, and then there is the possibility to play with a move of knight queen h5 and some other moves. So that's exactly what I thought would be most helpful and most useful to deliver. Essentially, the moment this actually comes, white has a good game. Everything feels strong, but it needs obviously a little more preparation so something real significant can actually happen. So after the move of f5, black played with b4. Now this is a very normal move. Most of the other move candidates, like for example e5, just failed due to knight e6. In case he was going to exchange, I was going to recapture or play queen h5 check, which looks even stronger, given that wherever the opponent king comes, there could be f takes d or f6 check and so on. However, essentially my opponent does b4, which makes more sense, attacking against the knight on the c3. Then there is also a nice shot against the opponent's pawn, against the pawn on the e4. So actually it's a very good job. That's what he would like to do. Threaten, counter, and make his possession more successful. Not necessarily, so to speak, one of the easiest and simplest ways to go, but it looks like a fine move. So what actually happened in the position was that after b4, I played f takes d, b takes to the c, and now everything is more or less forced. So I have to admit to you that so far I wasn't given any ability to just outweigh my opponent in terms of positional or psychological pressure. So it was a pretty good game for sure. But obviously what he wanted was just to take the piece, and in fact my opponent wasn't getting scared of the opening. So anyway, that was in a way an advantage. You see, when you're playing a game, it is important that you watch at what your opponent is doing. See, sometimes your surprise is going to make him spend some more time, in which case you've succeeded. In other positions, he'll just ignore what's going on the board and he'll be too overconfident. In either case, however, there is something that you can find in his behavior that will help you understand whatever advantage, whatever psychological edge you may take on. In this case, my opponent was just too confident, and yet the position required a more cautious approach from his side, which he just wasn't applying. So anyway, after king takes f, bishop c4, king e8, and then essentially I castled short side, this is the time when my opponent played knight e5, and he was still pretty confident, and yet I did knight e6. Black's queen went out, and I think this is the moment where basically he made a mistake. It's a small difference, but having the queen on the d7 was actually going to provide him with a little more flexibility on a later stage. Having it go to e7 looks like it will provide knight d7 or something eventually later on, but then it blocks the bishop and it causes some extra problems. Now, the secret in keeping a good advantage lies in your ability to hold them in a more challenging and a more difficult position. Something I loved about this was not just that knight that was simply brilliant, just being on the e6, but the fact that for the most part, my opponent didn't have anything to do with his pieces. And that was really huge as an opportunity. You see, if you can create strong enough pressure, therefore keeping your opponent behind, your attack, whatever it is, will transform into a much bigger and more powerful position. The moment I put my knight on e6, I knew that with the king on e8, he'll have to suffer. And then the bishop on d5 was powerful. Yes, a piece is missing, and that is not something we can take on lightly. But that has to do with another important advantage. See, first and foremost, you have to try and keep the problems against the opponent. And when I'm not just talking about the general problems, a problem on how we can take over control. See, keeping the pressure is probably the most powerful concept of attacking. Not so much because it will give you bring you a huge result, but rather because it's going to give you time, and it's going to make your opponent more frustrated as he has to stay in the bad or challenging position and make a very patient long-term defense in order to end up on the other side successfully. Not a lot of players can do that, and many of them, I have to say, get quite frustrated at the time because they just have to stay in a not very convenient, not too much of a nice position and defend patiently and painfully for a rather long amount of time. Yes, some players will do that and they'll be okay with it, but you're not going to find that many players who would really love doing it anyway. So my opponent started feeling his first pain at this moment when I played bishop d5. It was a move, or rather a sequence, he wasn't expecting, and so things start to look better very quickly. So what really happened after the move bishop d5? Well, my opponent did knight c6. An exchange on the d5 just wouldn't have given him so much. You can very easily realize that white can do queen takes d5, and next move we have b takes to the c, rook b1, the a8 is being attacked, so it's not that great for him. Of course, he could have done, just as well, the move of knight to the c6, and he did it. But then I played bishop b6, and that has to do with creating pressure again. It's important to understand that every pressure or threat you make against your opponent makes him believe or think he has to cover his position, he has to defend more, and he's getting worse. Even if he's not getting worse, it's just that you're making one or two type of attacks. In his eyes, he's going to have to lead a difficult and unpleasant defense, which is the same as having a bad position from a psychological aspect. The bishop b6 not only gives white more control, but brings a little extra pressure towards black's position, and makes it move even more difficult for him to plan along. After that, black had to do rook c8. And so take a second here to think about it yourself. What would you possibly like to follow or do in the position as white right now? You know, that's not a very easy question, but I'd like to help. First and foremost, you should not always rush. Similar to racing, leading up an attack is great when it's done in a forcing, quick attacking manner. But you have to know that there must be a stop. There must be a pause that we make in which we reload and we change the ties. We set some more fuel and then we get ready to continue attacking later on. That is the best and easiest way to explain how that works. So basically what I knew is that there are no more big forcing moves, and if I push my attack a little too much, it could backfire. So it's going to be a lot easier if I choose on a move like b takes to the c. Not so much because that move is super great, but mainly because I knew this move was going to guarantee me the b-file availability, the chance to put a rook there eventually, and the fact that with my opponent's king being so much backward, he's not going to be finding anytime soon an easy way out. So I had a very strong belief in what this position could give me. Remember, rushing is not a good idea. Anything you do must be a bit precise and careful, because if you try to rush things up, you can create vulnerabilities into your position that likely the opponent will exploit to his advantage. So, I knew that, and more importantly, after I played b takes to the c3, my opponent had to do g6, and then I did rook f6. This move is a real pain inside black's position. Not only that the rook itself is going to be incredibly powerful just where it stands, but the reason why I love that move is because that rook has now the ability to go to e6 or do something more just being there, and that makes it for an incredibly powerful attack. Oh yeah, that was very beautiful. I loved having that rook on f6, and more importantly, I loved the fact that black still couldn't move out of the way. In the game, he played knight d7, but it's going to be nice for you to understand why black doesn't play a move of bishop g7. Bishop g7 looks most comfortable, but then after knight takes g7, queen takes g7, and rook takes d6, this pawn falls, the black king still cannot castle, and that's really not good. I mean, not something that a player would really like to experience, and in his own way, standing in such a position. So I know black just didn't really feel too comfortable about this. It feels like an unpleasant position, and it is a rather unpleasant position. So he played the move of knight d7. Now, just as before, an incredible psychological pressure makes it when you keep your position strong enough, even without knowing exactly how you'll transform it. That makes your opponent spend some more time. And again, there is nothing more powerful as a psychological advantage than letting your opponent stay in a position he doesn't know how it will develop. Even winning material is not as big, because when you lose his material, yes, it feels bad, but he will live through it, and then he will have some hopes, some counterplay chances. However, when he's under pressure, even though everything could be equal, that is even more devastating in his own thoughts, because he just has to stay there knowing that at a certain point his position could collapse, and he doesn't get to see anywhere and how he can move forward from that. It's very painful feeling. That often forces him to spend more time in exhaustive calculations, and yet nothing clear comes out of that. So this is important. After the move of bishop to the d4, essentially my opponent didn't know what to do, so he just decided, let's exchange. I don't know if that was his biggest mistake, but certainly there is just not too much of a great alternative. It's a problem. The problems just happen, and this is one of them right now. The situation just doesn't look good no more. The moment he had to do this move, I actually recaptured with the queen. It is clear to see why the position is pretty good. There is a very strong support happening over the f6, and certainly not that many great options for black. So I knew everything is going well in the right direction. So it was pretty good, I have to say. Okay, well, after queen takes d, my opponent exchanged. Now, you're probably wondering, why did he not take the f6? First of all, g5 is defending, so he can't take with the queen. But if he takes with the knight, there is also a significant problem due to the knight g7 check, or even moves like f7 of the kind that are just as painful. There is so much more that can happen, but, I mean, f7, queen takes h8, rook f8 is just a very, very bad situation. So my opponent tried to deliver some other exchanges, like make this happen. If this eventually gets to happen, he will possibly do some more changes, and hopefully, this could end up better, I guess. I mean, that's what he's looking for. Make it easier, make it simpler, and a bit more straightforward. The important thing is, as that went along with the move of bishop takes to the d5, of course, that was the move of, I played the move e takes to the d, and then we can see the kind of problem that is going on in this position. So there is a real issue because of the position and the situation. After the exchange, black played with rook to the g8 in this moment. And yes, after that, I did queen a4. It's kind of interesting to see that knight takes f6 doesn't work for the very same reason as before. And more importantly than that, there is really no way on how he can do things differently. It's just a challenging position. So, after that, I played along with queen a4, simply adding a little extra tension, making him to think even more about how difficult the position is. Bishop g7 made me to use the last and only piece remaining in the battle, that rook. It was really important. You see, it's valuable that you bring over any pieces you need into the play. Having that rook go to f1 with the plan of rook f7 was really the best thing I could do. And so after the take, and then g takes f6, you could understand that black really couldn't do anything. He has a much more of a material, yet moves like rook f7, the attack on d7, and the horrible king on e8 practically forced him to take. His piece effectiveness is just completely awful. After g takes f, attacking the queen and going for f7, I could combine that with the threat of knight g5 in the inevitable rook e1 check that attacks the king as well as the knight on d7. This was too painful for him to endure, and it's easy to see why. There's just too many attacks and too many threats coming up at a pretty fast pace that just doesn't really give him a whole lot that he can do in response. What was really so interesting is that after he played king d8, obviously king f8 is impossible due to queen takes d7, so after king d8 I could just make the move knight e6 check, and that practically forced him to lose his queen. If the king came back to the e8, I would have probably done a move like knight c5 check to attack the knight, hit the king, and do more. But then after queen takes e6, rook takes d6, rook f8, and then rook takes d6, we can clearly understand white is winning. There is just no way on how black can escape the discovered attack. So it was really interesting for me to play this whole game. I mean, in the end I finished it with a very nice sweet tactic, going for the queen a5 or queen d5 and queen e5. I could win the rook. So the game was winning, yet it very well illustrated how we can actually set the opponent in a more challenging position and keep him there, therefore forcing him to spend more time making sure that you use his psychological condition, whether he's going to be overconfident or a little too fearful, to your advantage. And more importantly, an opening surprise sets the right skeleton for you. So thinking about how to surprise your opponent in the opening is always something you might want to consider as like a playing weapon. More importantly, understand that psychology is critical. Knowing your opponent or seeing how he behaves during a game is essential. Bobby Fischer said that psychology in chess isn't that important. But the truth is, Bobby Fischer said that psychology in chess isn't that important, but the truth is that psychology is key. If you actually get to understand how your opponent is thinking, you can drive the game towards the right path so you can succeed. Yes, Fischer did need it because he was much superior as opposed to the opponents, but we, the mortals, certainly need a little bit more of psychology to help us increase our chances and become more successful.